Welcome back to the program. If you are just joining us, it is Good Morning Kenya. For those who are just joining us, be it in the country or across the world, we found on YouTube, we're doing also, live up and all those kind of things. My name is Martin Mwanje. It's time for In the Headlines, and Peter Bande today is not with us. He'll be joining us tomorrow. He says he has other engagements, but I have got Ruth Mbogo here in studio. And I'll be doing In the Headlines with her so that we'll let you know what has been happening in the headlines, what to expect perhaps going forward. Karibu sana, Ruth.
Thank you.
Happy to see you.
Happy to see you again.
This particular morning.
Yes.
And let's just begin by way of looking at the question of dialogue.
Yes.
As of yesterday, the European Union, we had ELOG.
Yes.
We also had FKE. All of them are saying, listen, it's time to dialogue and find a way out of the current political stalemate. Apparently, President Uhuru Kenyatta, while in Garissa, said no. Dialogue, forget.
Yeah.
Which way then?
Well, it's quite interesting because I believe that the Constitution actually provides for alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, and it would be taken as if to mean that we are at a dispute. Yeah, we are at a dispute of two political sides that are both taking hard stands and both have their, different forms of irreducible minimums. And if we do not begin to think about how we can resolve this in the most sober of ways, in a platform and on a forum that gives both parties a chance to say that, this is what I think needs to be done. This is what, this is what our side thinks needs to be done. This is what our side thinks needs to be done. Most of the times when there is a dispute and when there is a political crisis, it is mostly based on interests, yeah? And it is mostly issue-based. So it would be interesting if both parties actually sat down and discovered that they have similar interests. I believe that NASA wants to have a free, fair, credible, election. And I also believe that even in the spirit of Jubilee, with their electoral reforms, they're seeking to have a free, fair, and credible election. And if both parties are truly interested in having a free, fair, and credible election, then there should be no reason as to why they are both, taking hard stands. And I think we are at a point in time as a nation where we cannot afford to take hard stands, because in as much as the presidency is at stake, in as much as who is to take over the presidency is a question at hand, there are lives at play. There is a lot of tension that is currently, currently at play in the nation. There's a lot of, uncertainty. There are, as it seems, protests that are going on, and a response to the protests being, unmeted, unwarranted, and unlawful police force. And citizens are concerned. Yesterday, over and above the calls for dialogue, we had the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International releasing a report of the number of people and giving their stories of people who, passed away right after the announcement of the presidential election results. I don't think that hard stands would lead us to a free, fair, credible, and not only, free, fair, credible, but an election that leaves this country, together intact and that does not lead to further loss of life. So I believe that these two parties should be able to lessen their stance. They should be able to say that in the interest of the nation, because they both seem to be saying that they are doing it in the interest of the nation. That in the interest of the nation, can we sit down with Jubilee, sit down with NASA, sit down with IEBC, sit down with parties that are sober enough, parties that have the interest of this heart, the interest of Kenya at heart, and find a way out, because we cannot also be perpetually in an electioneering mood, and neither can we also be in an extensive and an endless litigious, situation in the country. I mean, yesterday I saw the statement going around Twitter that, we should now start expecting tyranny of petitions and appeals. So I don't think that is where we would wish to be as a country. Yes.
So the question of dialogue then, when we are sitting together as a country,
yes,
is it to discuss about how to conduct the poll?
I think,
or what will it be?
I think that this dialogue needs to touch on very many key issues, because I don't think it's a dialogue that should, conclude how we are to just conduct this particular election. If there is need to have dialogue, it should be dialogue that comprehensively looks at issues that are going to come up, not just from this election, but from the outcome of the election, in case we ever go back to the Supreme Court. Remember that the Chief Justice Maraga said that, you know, if we go back to another election and the election is contested, we shall apply the same you know, ruling. So I think a lot of things need to be addressed. The manner in which, I think first and foremost, the question that needs to be addressed first and foremost is that, is this date really a reasonable date to hold the election? Going by the fact that there are so many cases right now that have gone to court. We know that Haron Mao, and I guess maybe we'll discuss that later, has gone to court. We know that NASA, I think, has also gone to court. We know that there's an appeal pending of the Ekuru Aukot ruling that seeks to literally declare that even Ekuru himself should have not been gazetted, and the other 5 candidates. So first we need to determine, we have 9 days to go. Is it enough time? Is it even enough time to, first of all, conduct a training for presiding officers? Is it enough time to procure ballot papers? Is it enough time to have resolved the issues that are at hand? Is it enough time to even implement, if, let's say, for instance, the president assents to law the bill that has just passed in parliament? Is it enough time to allow citizens who would wish to criticize the grounds of that bill to do so?
The 60 days lapse on November 1st.
I understand that the 60 days...
The 60 days. I'm just trying to imagine.
Yes.
Assuming that IBC woke up today and said, now that we only have 80 days remaining to the fresh election on October 26th, let's put this thing the last day, November 1st. Do you think NASA will be comfortable with November 1st?
You see, one thing I want us to understand is that the Constitution is normally very clear on timelines. And there's a reason as to why there's need to have clarity of timelines. And I think we are now at a crisis, especially at a crisis of timelines, because of a misinterpretation of the Constitution and a misinterpretation of, you know, legal precedent that had already been set by IBC. And I think it's also, because if you look at it objectively and you get to understand the workings of the law on how the fresh elections were to be conducted, it is evident that IBC clearly went against not only the ruling in the Ekuru Aukot, the judgment in the Ekuru Aukot ruling, but also in the precedents that was set by the 2013 decision. So I think the issue of time is one that the Elections Act is very clear about. And had IBC truly followed, you know, the law as it is, then we would not be standing where we are now saying, you know, let's just push it to November. We cannot have, I don't think we should have an IBC that arbitrarily decides whenever they want to have the elections. Remember that elections have been proven to affect the economy of the nation. They have been proven to affect, you know, livelihood, to affect the general calm and peace of the nation. Recently, there's a World Bank report that was launched by the Economic also Institute, the Institute of Economic Affairs, that indicated that, you know, during the electioneering years and during the electioneering season, the economy grows by, I think, a minimum of, is it 4%? So the GDP of the country is suffering because of elections. The IBC cannot just arbitrarily say that, you know what, so we think we are going to have the elections on 1st. If they decide to have the elections on 1st November, or say 10th November, will that have been enough time to deal with all these issues? I don't think the timelines should be arbitrarily decided. They should be decided, should be decided after having had everything cleared and, you know, all issues sorted, all cases done and dealt with, and the nation ready for an election.
But the argument is the Supreme Court rules that elections must be held within 60 days. And the deadline is on 1st November. That is the last day.
That is exactly how the Supreme Court ruled, that the fresh elections need to be held within the next 60 days. But remember that the ruling back in 2013 went further, you know, upon the advisory opinion that was sought by the Attorney General, who was appearing as amicus curiae in the case. Attorney General went before the Supreme Court and he sought to ask the court, since there is no clear law as to what needs to happen if the presidential election is nullified, what then should be the way forward? And the Supreme Court was very clear that if there is to be a fresh election and following the invalidation of the presidential election, that new election needs to be held in 60 days. But then it went further and said that where there are now 2 candidates left, and I think this is provided for by the Elections Act, where there are now 2 candidates left within a repeat election, or rather a fresh election, and one of the candidates withdraws, then fresh nominations need to be called for. So which means these fresh nominations essentially is open the ground for whoever needs to now be part of the election, even if it's I, Ruth, decide that now I want to be a presidential candidate, allow me to go through the entire process of nomination. And that needs to be done in a period of 90 days. The whole period of the season of nominations and now the new elections need to be done in a period of 90 days, which means that had IEBC complied fully with the 2013 ruling, and which they did at first until they misinterpreted the Justice Mativo ruling, then we would be looking at an election 90 days having been set, a new election being set 90 days after, IEBC acknowledged the receipt of NASA's withdrawal from the election.
But then that is a question that former Kilome Member of Parliament, Aaron Mwau, has gone to court.
Exactly.
Seeking interpretation of what paragraph 290 means of the Supreme Court judgment of 2013. But how is this the reason why ELOG, that's Election Observation Group, and we also have the European Union, are saying, listen, perhaps IBC should have sought an advisory opinion regarding this particular matter? Because there are those who say that the aspects you are referring to were obiter.
Yeah. I understand that. And
so that it's not binding. Let's just simplify that. That was not binding.
Let's discuss the question of obiter that has been doing rounds, everywhere. The question of obiter, basically, obiter dicta is words that are said by a judge in passing during the process of making a ruling. And most of the times for statements to be qualified as obiter, they need not to have been emanating from the issues that were within a particular petition. In the 2013 case, it was actually an issue for determination. The moment the AG joined the case as an amicus curiae, as a friend of the court, his only question, I believe, was what then needs to happen, which means that which is being called as obiter was actually part of the issues that were to be determined by the court. But can we look at what the Constitution says in Article 163.7? The Constitution in 163.7 says that decisions of the Supreme Court are binding on all courts of lower jurisdiction, which means whatever decisions of the Supreme Court are binding on all courts of lower jurisdiction. And there are cases that have been decided in the past, one of them being there was a Supreme Court petition of 2014. I think it was Supreme Court petition, if I get the citation right, it is Supreme Court petition number 5 of 2014. It was a case between a legislator called Lemankian, and I think he was contesting an election, And one of the things that the court said and determined was that even words that are considered as obiter, if emanating from the Supreme Court, which is the highest court of the land, are binding upon other courts of lower jurisdiction. And let's not forget that, the Constitution allows for creation of laws to determine how that Constitution is to be interpreted. And one of the laws that the Constitution clearly indicates and stipulates that needed to be enacted by Parliament was the Supreme Court Act. And the Supreme Court Act was enacted. And in Section 3 of that Act, that section clearly says that the Supreme Court has the powers to interpret the Constitution bearing in mind the history of the nation and having in mind, the progressive nature of the country and taking into account the fact that they should be interpreting questions of law for the good of society and on issues. Basically, that the Supreme Court Act Section 3 and Section 1 and Article 163.7 of the Constitution gives the Supreme Court unlimited powers to determine issues that come before it. And there are also very many other cases of different jurisdictions. There's a court in Canada that affirmed the principle that if obiter is emanating from the highest court of the land, it is binding on all courts. So that is why you're seeing the petitions that are going before court, and people are now seeking advisory opinion. And I believe that, I honestly believe from a standpoint of law, that if the Aaron Mwau petition goes through, then the Supreme Court will definitely decide, or rather the High Court will decide that, what had been set as precedents in the 2013 case needs to be upheld.
But then, as we talk about that, and by the way, that's interpretation according to the Ruth. This is a matter that is before courts, and the courts are going to give the ultimate interpretation. But this is the High Court that Aaron Mwau is seeking that interpretation. Paragraph 290. And there's nothing that stops one from moving to the Court of Appeal when
Neither, yes.
the High Court pronounces itself on that matter.
Yeah.
And nothing stops one from moving from the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court. The question is, what might be the implication of whatever interpretation the High Court is going to have on October 26th?
Well,
now that this is a case before court.
What the implications would be this: if the High Court upholds that what had been determined in the Supreme Court ruling of 2013 needed to have been upheld by the High Court, and I think it's also just the same question that is at the Court of Appeal by the petitioners Abraham Mutai and Nelson Harvey. It's the same question they're asking. So if the High Court upholds that what had been interpreted to mean, what had been originally interpreted in the 2013 case is what needs to stand, then what this means is that the IBC will be forced to first and foremost de-gazette the other, candidates. This is by the Harun Mao petition. IBC will be forced to de-gazette all the other candidates, including Ekuru Aukot, and go back to having the two original candidates. And remember that NASA had already submitted its withdrawal. Going by, if the High Court upholds what had been, if the High Court says that this was binding, then it means that IBC will now have, again, to go back to a fresh de-gazette, then go back to a fresh nomination and call for interested parties to now, be nominated and then hold a new election in a span of 90 days.
So what about if it's the other way and Raila Odinga has withdrawn and then they tell you that a particular decision, the paragraph 290 was obiter, and so it was not binding, and Raila Odinga has withdrawn, then effectively he loses so that the election proceeds as it is planned. That's what it means.
That's exactly what it means. But let's wait and see how the court will interpret this. But I always say that, the law is very clear. What happens is lawyers, tend to interpret the law to serve the interests of their parties, and of their clients and of their parties. So let's wait and see what the courts have to say. I believe that, the judiciary and the judiciary is, well versed with the law, and they should be able to give us a way forward. Though my concern is that I hope that whatever the outcome of the court's decision, the court needs not to operate as if they're operating in a vacuum, in a society devoid of people, or rather to operate in a manner not aware of the current political situation. I think whatever decision the court needs to come up with, the court needs to be aware that Kenya is a country that at the moment as it stands is highly polarized, and any decision for or against, either of the parties or the parties involved in this election could catastrophically, either it could lead this country to a level, catastrophic destruction, or to, clarity and way forward. Yeah.
Then the question will be, with the election set for next Thursday, how fast can we expect these decisions by the High Court?
For sure, I have been following the petition, the appeal by the Ekuru case, and I understand that the court has issued a date of hearing to be this Thursday. The Court of Appeal is to hear the case this Thursday and to issue a ruling on Friday. So, and you see, if they issue a ruling on Friday, then we expect most gazettements of government matters are done on Friday. So I don't know how this is going to work out. But in the case that the appeal goes through, then IBC has no choice. But then again, I don't know if you came across this tweet that was purported to have come from IBC's official handle, and that was taken down, moments right after the same tweet was put up, claiming that IBC had said that, we are going to push this election given the current circumstances. It was actually a tweet by the IBC verified account. And these days, Kenyans tend to rely on communication from Twitter. Twitter has become a legal way of communicating, So I don't know what this means. To me, as a citizen, I honestly think if the tweet truly came from IBC, then there is a crisis in IBC. You can tell that if that is a tweet from the IBC, and going by the new regulations and directions IBC keeps giving daily updates that do not seem to be consistent, then to me, I would take it as a citizen that there is lack of communication within the IBC. There are probably wrangles that we are yet to hear of within the IBC, and the same needs to be sorted out. I don't think we can afford to go to an election unprepared. Neither can we afford to go to an election where parties feel as if their issues have not been addressed. And also, we cannot afford to go to an election as a country right now, as polarized as we are. Certain issues need to be addressed. Over and above the election matters, what is currently happening in the society needs to be addressed. I believe that, to be honest, in my opinion as a citizen, the excessive use of force by the police on the citizen needs to be addressed, because this not only, I mean, this causes scare and fear amongst voters, because now I would want to think that, if violence is being meted upon my people, what gives me the assurance that if on that day of the voting, nothing will happen to me? What gives me assurance that as a citizen, after the voting and the results have been announced, I shall not face, or rather we shall not face the same, the same violence that we are facing and police brutality? I think that needs to be addressed. Yeah.
Talking about Twitter, and I'm on Twitter,
Yes.
I see BBC tweeting here, Kenya's Chief Electoral Officer defends his position in an in-depth interview with BBC Kenya Watch, I want to believe. And talking about Chief Executive Officer, that's IEBC, Ezra Chiloba, and as we bring this to an end, Ekura Aukot wants him to quit office. And as we talk about Ekura Aukot, by the way, have you sent him money? He did release a pay bill number yesterday.
No offense. No offense, but I have very personal opinions against Ekuru Aukot's recent, lack of clarity and lack of a clear stand. Because the other day, when he said that let's proceed with the elections as we have already, as IBC has planned, when he said he's on the ballot, he said the country does not need to stand because two people are not agreeing on the way forward. And for me, I find this very hypocritical, because when he says that the country should not come to a standstill because of two individuals who are not ready to agree and move on, and yet one of the individuals' main concern is that Chiloba must go. And, during his statement, he clearly said that, he's satisfied with the level of reforms that IBC has put in place. And he clearly said that there's not enough time to meet the NASA's irreducible minimums. And in fact, I think he almost sounded as if he was dismissing the entire irreducible minimums that NASA had. And yet even him, in the first place, had his own set of irreducible minimums. So when he turns around and now says, oh, Chiloba must go, as a citizen, and even if I was a potential voter, I don't think I would take him seriously as an individual. And I would want to believe that he's probably dancing to somebody's tune right about now. Or maybe he has realized that when he declared that now, when he said that now, let's move on with the elections, his supporters really came, and condemned his lack of stand and told him, we thought you have, because I saw on social media, he was bashed and he was told, we thought you were the alternative leadership. We expected you to be the voice of reason. And now he's realizing that, maybe he's losing political relevance. And so he needs to go back to his original, hard stance that Chiloba must go. And if Chiloba is to go as he's purporting, and he still wants to have an election on 26th of October, then it is unreasonable. But he says, it is unreasonable.
But do you agree with him that there is no time, perhaps, to implement the reducible minimums? If we were to go with 60 days?
If we were to go by 60 days, there is no time to implement the reducible minimums. And in fact, one of the reducible minimums that seems to be time-barred is that call for the removal of the IEBC CEO. You need to have an entire process. There's an entire legally stipulated process to remove the IEBC CEO. And that takes a lot of days. That takes a tribunal to be put up. So now when he says, first, that there is no time to remove, the IEBC, when he says that there's no time to implement the reducible minimums, and then he comes and says that, Chiloba must go, it is clearly contradiction. I don't know how you take it.
It's so you say.
On the face of it, contradiction.
My profession dictates that I'm objective.
All right.
And therefore I'm going to remain.
As a citizen, I think that is just a contradiction on the face of it. Yes.
Thank you, Ruth Ambogo, for getting time to be with us. We want to wish you well.
Thank you.
We'll do this tomorrow again. And I know there's a lot of developments. It's only 8 days remaining to the a fresh poll that is slated for October 26th. Whether it's going to happen or not is a question everybody seems to be confused about. And IBC so far, yesterday, it did not speak about the election, and we continue to wait and pray for those who are Christians like we are. We continue to pray that the power of the blood that was shed at Calvary will take charge. We'll take a break.
Amen.
And Safina Cheng is coming up with the next interview. Stay tuned to the program.